Now that we are confident that we have found good solutions to the glue issues we've been having, Arabella is ready to receive more of her planking. These next planks will also be attached above the bronze floors, which means that it is finally time to start putting in some of her copper rivets. It finally feels like we're getting back on track after the setbacks from this summer. So yesterday Steve and I worked on this plank over here, and it went on fantastically well. We cut from the back side of the plank this time with the skill saw, and it seems like the angles are spot on right away. So all we needed to do were a couple of spots where we needed to dub, we needed to pull back some frames, and needed to work at the nib a little bit and then cut the end back. But honestly, very minor work on it, and we are hoping to put that up probably tomorrow. But today we're back at the prop shaft, and hopefully we can finish getting this installed. Joe is finishing up the last touches on the Delrin liner. We milled out some flats on the sides so that once the stern post starts to compress, it has something to purchase on, and hopefully that will keep the Delrin liner from spinning inside the hole that we've drilled. Which it shouldn't even touch the prop shaft, but if in any case it does swell or the prop shaft gets squeezed between the stern post and closes up onto the shaft, it won't take it with it. The shaft will be spinning inside it, but hopefully the Delrin liner will stay still. And that should be something that we can pull apart and bore out if we ever need to down in the future. So we're gonna go ahead and try to put all this stuff in today, and hopefully all goes well.
Alright, so 17 and looks like 3/16, 5/16. So we need to cut the Delrin to that 17.5. So we need to trim off about 1/4 inch. Microplastics. We did a final little bit of shaping here for the stuffing box attachment, and we had to do a little more counterboring, so we got that counterbored and that sits well. And then we pulled a measurement for the Delrin liner here. We cut that to length, and we had Joe machine 2 tiny little grooves on either side of the liner. And the reason for that is we're going to put it in so that those grooves are facing out to the side. And the idea is when this timber swells a little bit, it should kind of grab onto these grooves a little bit, and that should hopefully help eliminate from wanting to twist inside the stern post at any time. So now that we have all this done and cut to length, just got to see if we can slide that in there.
A little copper naphthenate in the hole before the liner is driven in will help any wood exposed to water resist the intrusion of sea worms and other critters.
All right, go for it.
Alright, slow down. That's 5/16. There. Yeah, we're at like 3/8.
I guess let's paint everything. Take that, you creepy crawlies. Copper on copper on copper.
Lunchtime?
Lunchtime. I was thinking about putting a little cotton behind the washers, but I think the water has so far to get to the bolts that if it's going to come through the bolts, it's going to come out around the plate.
I think so too.
I think that'll do, pig.
With the prop shaft assembly finally in place, we got right to putting up the portside plank that we prepped and painted the day before.
I've gotten so sophisticated at this.
You want?
So I'm trying to do is snug them up so that they like are an eighth an inch away or so from touching on the bottom, quarter to an eighth, and then we can suck them down, and it shouldn't like smear the dolphin. Okie dokie. Let her sit overnight and starts to get used to her shape.
Screw it tomorrow.
And tomorrow we'll give her everything a little crank. And then tomorrow is screwing and bolting and riveting. Be the first time we put rivets in the boat.
Just gets riveted.
Yep. Yeah, it'll get screws back here in the stern. Where it hits bronze floors in the stern and in the stem, it'll get carriage bolts. And all down midship will be rivets. So tomorrow you should hear the rattle of the rivet gun going.
Exciting. Exciting times.
Hey, how are you? No, do. Yeah. I'm trying to set up the toolkit for inside the boat. I like it when you undo things and nothing moves.
Right. That's the idea, right?
Those big screws shouldn't be too much room. Shouldn't be too much room.
So you hope for.
It's just as square to that. How'd that come out? Now we need an 8-inch clamp.
Yep, cranker.
All right. I guess let's get set up and try to do a rivet.
Yeah.
I'm gonna want some ear protection.
Is this something that, or is it the other one?
I got the other one. So we're putting the first of our homemade rivets into Arabella. And before we go into that process, let's look at some of the rivets that we pulled out of Victoria, who is that 100-year-old boat that we took apart for a bunch of her mahogany and her bronze and brass, which I'm sure many of you remember. So Victoria was fastened with copper rivets that were this diameter. So it's just under a 1/4 inch, so 3/16. And after about 100 years, they look like this, which is really not too bad, right? They lasted really well. And one of the incredible things with these when we started pulling them out is how little they actually peened them over. So that is the rove. They just used a flat washer, and that is the head that they peened on. But apparently that sufficed for about 100 years. This is a rivet from Victoria, well, the size of rivet that was in Victoria. And this is the rivets that we've been making for Arabella. So they're a lot bigger, and they are square. And we're putting these 1/4 inch square rivets into a 1/4 inch round hole, which means that all 4 of these corners are biting into the wood. And if we hold this right, you can kind of see how much is sticking out past that drill. And all of that copper is cutting its own channel into the plank as well as through the frame as it gets hammered in. So Casey's here helping us out, and he's been hammering these in from the outside of the boat for us. And on the inside, first I've been using this rove set tool that Caitlin out in Colorado made for us. And you can see there's a domed face that matches the dome on the rove, and it's drilled out to accept the rivet. So as Casey hammers the rivet in, I put this over the rivet. And what we found that does is it helps to keep the fibers from lifting up where those corners are kind of cutting their own path through the hole. And that is eliminating the tear out that we got on a couple of the first ones around the rivet as it comes through. And then we put the rove on, put the set over it, give the set a few whacks with the hammer. And just like the rivet bites into the wood, it also bites into the rove a little bit. And what all this does is it makes the rivet really hang on well to the timber, and it makes the rove hang on really well to the rivet, so that when we take the bolt cutters and nip it off and start the peening process, there's a bunch of resistance already. And there's Casey on the outside with the backing iron who's backing it up even more to make sure that that rivet doesn't back out. After I nip off the rivet with the bolt cutters, we've been using this Ingersoll Rand gun to form the rivet head. And I've been starting with this domed one and kind of shaping the head a little bit, and then we have these 2 concave ones of a little bit different depth, and we use those to kind of do the final shaping. And so far they're absolutely not perfect, and we've gotten a few smileys, and I know you aviation folks out there, these would not be up to snuff for your industry, but to hold this wooden boat together, I think they are more than adequate. So now we've kind of gone through a bit of the process, let's jump in and do it for real.
Now, same depth?
No.
Mm-mm.
So, the counter bore for the bolts sit proud of the counter bore.
Okay.
The rivets are going to sit more or less flush with the bottom of the counter bore because we're going to drive them in until they start to just compress down into the wood fibers a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't need to be quite as deep because with the bronze bolts you got to have the space for the head as well, which we're not really going to have with the rivets.
I'm like a third in to where I was on the others.
Oh, got much more than that.
More. Okay.
Because think about it this way: we've got to shave off and shape the outside of the
Yeah,
plank.
yeah. No, of course you don't want to hit it.
And then the bung should still have like a 1/4 of an inch at least in there to grab onto.
Yeah, or it won't stay. It'll pop.
There you go.
So I'm probably about just shy of where I was on the others.
Yeah, it'd probably be good.
Yep. Okay.
So that one's on the cusp. That one I would still put in.
Right.
But any smaller head than that would get, basically we call it a reject. Like that one's also kind of on the cusp. But just before you hammer them in, take a gander at it.
Yeah.
And if there's any doubt, pull them off to the side.
Yeah.
Cool. You ever run one of these?
Pardon?
You ever run one of these?
No.
Okay. Push it against it, and
Yeah.
it needs to have full contact, and then just kind of feather the trigger. Okay, so you can throw the backing iron on there. I think they'll get prettier as I go, but I still think that's fine. Do that a little bit, not too bad. I need to mushroom it out more.
From this side of the planking, I have a drill and a recess when I am drilling in to this hole. And we are actually offsetting these holes. You don't want to line too many up in a row. It will cause too much stress in one line. And so I am trying to do it a little offset, also trying to see the frame lining up with that so it comes out in the same spot as I drilled in. And once I've drilled in, done the countersink, then we grab a rivet. And we get that going. First of all, you got to be in your favorite chair. And then use a gun to drive it the rest of the way in. And that flurry at the end there is just to make the head a little bit flatter. So when we put the bunkin in, we don't have too much of an edge to bite into the wood. And then I back it up, and at this point Steve will drive the rove on.
So I watch the hole, and as Casey pounds that rivet in with the rivet gun, I take the backing iron and put it over the rivet as it comes through. And that way it helps keep any of the fibers down, because they have a tendency to want to lift up and split out. And that way it keeps that lifting up and splitting out into an area that's smaller than the head of the rove, so it'll all be covered up and won't really matter. So once that's all the way through and Casey's got the backing iron in place, then I use the set and set it and get to nipping and peening. After I get the rove set, I take the bolt cutters and nip it off. And I'm slowly getting the hang of judging the distance. You don't want to leave too little because then you end up with a small head, and if you leave too much, you end up with a really big bulbous head. So it's definitely been a bit of a learning curve. I think by the time we get 3 or 4 planks in the boat, I really get the hang of it. But once they're cut off, we're using this domed one and really light feathers on the trigger and just starting to kind of form a head, and then switching over to some concave ones and using those to finish forming the head. And I've actually found that leaving the spring off of here and just gently holding this seems to be fine. We're really not hitting these very hard, and we don't have the gun cranked up to any high settings. So far, control of that seems to be really easy, and I can switch between tips really fast. So let's see if we can get this head formed. In a previous video, we talked a little bit about the riveting process, and we got a ton of comments from people in the aviation industry who rivet professionally for a living. And they had a lot of feedback for us. And a lot of that feedback very much differs from what we've heard and read about boat building. And I think a lot of that goes down to material. So in boat building, everything that I've ever read is you back up the rivets on the outside of the boat and you peen them on the inside with either a rivet gun or a ball peen hammer. And the aviation folks have been telling us to do the peening from the inside with basically a backing iron and have the rivet gun stay on the outside to drive the rivet. And I think the reason this isn't commonly done in boat building is because you're using these big honking rivets that are pounded in through a big chunk of timber, and these rivets really, really grip that timber. So if we were to try to just back it up on the inside and hit it from the outside of the boat, we would just end up driving it right through the planking, and that would be horrible on the cedar planking because the cedar would just compress underneath it. So I believe that's the reason why in boat building you peen from the inside and back from the outside, where in aviation that's a bit different. Folks also had some concerns about little smiley faces that end up in the rows a little bit if we're not perfect when we do the final doming. And same thing with maybe the heads on a couple of them being a little bit small. But just to reiterate, I mean, I don't know what I did with them, but the ones for Victoria are incredibly tiny. And the plans for Arabella actually called for galvanized boat nails. So according to Acorn, we should have just taken about 1/4-inch diameter galvanized nails and driven them through the first piece of split frame and into the second piece of split frame. And according to him, that would have sufficed. So by that logic, we should be able to hammer these copper rivets in and not even peen over the inside. And they should be much stronger than the galvanized boat nails that she was originally designed with. So even if we don't get the whole peening process perfect and we've got a few smiley faces and maybe some heads that are a little bit underformed, these things, by the time we drive them through those frames, are not going anywhere, and the peening is almost just extra insurance. So even if you were to go through and take off all of the peening that we did and just have these big square rivets pounded through the frames, I don't think the planks would go anywhere. And it's way more overkill than she was ever designed or meant to have. So I think we're good. I mean, right though, from galvanized boat nails to these things.
Well, that's what they had at the time, right?
Yeah. Do you want the mic?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, man, I really think we could just cut that flush and call that a day, and it would be fine. Like, really?
Yeah.
How much effort is it to drive
A
those
lot.
in?
I'm thinking, man, I'm so glad I have that.
These things are
Yeah.
like,
I know. And particularly how slow they go in too is really great for the fiber of the wood to grip to them.
yeah.
Your nails that are you hammer in, you know, like carpenters do it all the time. They'll do it in 2 strokes and drive
Yep.
it in. The nail that you drive in with 100 strokes is going to stay way better than the one you drove in so hard so fast.
Yeah.